Welcome to the Speaking Podcast. You can find all our episodes on speakingpodcast.com. My guest today, a speaker, author, podcaster, podcast guesting expert, and founder of Elite Podcasting PR and booking agency, Guest Experts on Air. His talents in public relations, the media and marketing made him the associate publisher and vice president of a hemisphere newspaper in 16 countries and a professor in 3, and got him interviews on more than 50 TV shows. He was a guest on my meditation podcast, episode number 123, which was titled What is Meditation and How It Relates to Religion. It was a fantastic conversation. And I also had the honour of being on his show, his podcast, Owned by the Beach, episode number 21, titled Mindful Podcasting. Please welcome Josef Schinwald. Did I do justice with the surname? I know that's usually my problem in podcasting, is people's pronunciation of their surname.
No, it's fantastic. Hello, Roy. Hello, everybody.
So I'm looking forward to this, because we're basically we're doing similar things. We're helping people on shows, and there's pros and cons of all the different things that's going on. So I suppose let's start off with your own kind of podcasting journey. How you started the podcasting, how you started the business.
It's a long time ago. I was going from my studies in New York. 5 years I studied there for a master's. I got a job in Latin America. I studied in Honduras, so I was working with a hemisphere newspaper. Then I was promoted to Buenos Aires, to the hemisphere's headquarters of that newspaper. And that's where it started, because I got invited to television. I got invited to teach at universities, and it got better and better, like 50 television appearances and 3 universities I taught. So public speaking for me was like the next step, because the first one was actually an experience I had only with 21 years after my high school in Austria, that I went to the fortress in Salzburg, which is in Salzburg, a fortress on a hill, where I suddenly was in front of 100 people. Like I was a tourist guy in summertime, and that's 7 times a day, and I lost completely my voice. So the same thing happened actually on television when I was down there. And because public speaking, right, that is a big thing. A lot of people have more fear from public speaking than from death itself. And I have to acknowledge it somehow, because that kind of fear is there. And in the beginning, it's for everybody the same. And you're always a little bit anxious and nervous when you go on an interview. Unless you know somebody, like I know you, I'm very calm. And it's actually a good thing, because, you don't want to know the questions. It should be an experience for you as well. But I remember when the first time 3 cameras was at me, directed at me, 3 cameras, for that television, where I was like 50 times. I got used to it. I was really like dancing it well then, after a while. But in the beginning, I was seeing myself from above. I saw the chair where I sat, but I wasn't there. And then, I was there from above, but then I wasn't there anymore either. So I was really like completely, so much fear. I was gone. And still, I went there again. It was the discipline, right? And I became, very, very confident. And so then from that experience, interviewing was something I really liked, because I got clients. I did consulting and coaching, also next to my hemisphere job and teaching at universities. And I felt like when I heard about when I saw the podcasting is something where you don't need anymore the media moguls. You're going around, all the podcasters, they are now rising to the top, the good ones, and the podcast guests, they're rising to the top, the good ones, also because it's democratizing the whole thing. It's not anymore like vitamin B, like we say in Austria. Vitamin B means vitamin relationships. It actually should be vitamin R. That the media mogul just invites all these people where he has a benefit, financially, whatever, and then they get them to the top. Sometimes it is like this, or the owners of the whole network of publishing. But it is like very democratizing. It's still, it can be the influencer podcasts. They are very selective, because they are sponsored by the companies, and they don't take everybody. The podcasters who are working for a big consulting company, they won't take consultants who might be their competitors. It's still there, of course, but they can't avoid it. Human society, right? And what is ideal? But ultimately, anybody can do a podcast, and anybody can be a guest on a podcast. So I think that's what we are talking about it today a little bit, how people can get on podcast, how they overcome the public speaking fear. That's very important. A lot of people say no to it, but if you don't show up, if you're not proactive and you've written a book, you have to be proactive because your message will not go out. That's simple.
Absolutely. And I mean, like I was late to the game, kind of overcoming my fear of public speaking. But obviously, when I started podcasting, I had been doing the Toastmasters, so it wasn't that difficult for me. But I've like had guests come on, especially if they've never been on a podcast, and they're so nervous. And I think just through my experience of Toastmasters and everything, I was able to make them relax and get a fantastic interview out of them. But I'm just curious, like, because obviously you get clients coming on, and you know, not all of them, even if they are promoting their book or their business, not all of them, usually sometimes people have somebody else, if it's in a business, that's doing all the talk, and they kind of stay in the background. But when they're going on the podcast tour, they have to kind of be themselves, basically. And like one of the things that I do is I kind of encourage going on the smaller shows, or even in Pakistan, there's a guy, Rohan Alawala, that's like, he's got all these people that they're doing live shows. And it's like, it's a great way to learn and make your mistakes, and then I can kind of review the interviews and give tips on how they can become better. So I'm just curious, like with your clients, I presume you've come across people that have a fear of public speaking, you know, podcast speaking, let's call it.
Yeah. Well, I get a lot of clients who have been frustrated, really frustrated with agencies before, even public relation agencies, because they said they didn't give me good enough podcasts. And that's my offer. I'm a lead podcast agency, so I get them usually like 1% and higher global rank, which means about 5,000 audience each time. But I also have podcast guests, like I have now a German guy. He's in leadership, but he just wrote a book and he doesn't have any experience. He was never on a podcast. So I give him right away some good ones already, like 5% global rank, where he has like a few hundred or 500 or 1,000 or more audiences. But also, you know, when the podcast host is good, I take it, even if it's not such a great podcast in the beginning, because you learn from the podcast host. Actually, there are, you know, talking with my clients often about the experience, I really feel like it's good to say that podcast hosts are very important, because I've been on top level podcasts myself where the podcast host was asking me, what kind of questions should I ask you? And I told her, and then I had a terrible experience with the podcast interview, because I was talking to myself. She asked me the questions I told her, right? I really like the surprise element. That's the wonderful thing with interviews. If you have a deep expertise, you will not space out. You will not go in different directions. You can go in all kinds of directions, but you will come back to your deep expertise, which should be focused on your money making. You don't have to pitch yourself. You don't have to, I sell this for, no, but it is about what you sell. It's about your offer. People won't notice it, but that's your interview if you want to have a successful podcast tour, because you only get paid for something which is, if you have a premium service and you don't have anything which differentiates you from others, you will not succeed. But if you have that, you will be a good talker. You will be a good on public speaking on podcasts. And, you know, storytelling is just like, you know, Seth, what is his name again? 1 second. Seth Godin. Seth Godin, he wrote this marketing books, a lot of them. He was really famous 20 years ago. He says, marketing is no longer about the stuff that you make, but about the stories you tell. I like that, because, you know, when you do podcast guesting, you do the right thing right now, because it's about the stories you tell. And particularly if you're a solopreneur, an expert who wrote a book, or you're like representing a company, you always tell a story. Why? Because the brand is what people remember about you when you are in a room, when you're not in the room and they talk about you. That's your brand. And the stories you tell, where else would you get such 45 minutes to talk about you? I mean, think about all the advertising we are offered to, Facebook advertising, whatever, right? It's always short. It doesn't make people remember, unless you have a podcast tour and you make those short clips, right? You can do that also. So with AI, now you get that one hour interview, and then you make 25 clips with AI. And it's always already, basically AI chooses the best highlights of your talk. You can modify it a little bit. You can push a little bit the slider. You get a perfect 30-second, 1 minute second episode, like a part of your interview. You get it 25 times. People will get to know this on social media, and that is okay. That is short, but it creates also your brand, because the perception will be that you are the authority, the go-to expert who is always invited to podcasts. So did I go around in the full circle now?
And then, I'm doing the shorts and reels as well. But like you mentioned about, people kind of asking for the questions. I've been asked that a few times and I never give it to myself. No, I'm not doing it. I even had one recently where the person basically sent me the full conversation of how it should go, what he's going to say, what I'm going to say. So when he came on, he thought it was going to be audio only. And I said, it's not audio only, and I'm not doing this. And he was really panicking and nervous. And I got him to relax, and we had a fantastic interview. But like, as you say, like when people even, like, because I do podcast tours as well, I go on other shows and people ask me about the question, I don't want to know. I don't even read it. Sometimes they send it to me. I don't read it on purpose because I want to be speaking from the heart instead of having pre-recorded, because it's not genuine. And
it's not a conversation, a genuine conversation. And we should talk like on a cocktail party. I mean, when you're on a cocktail party and there are people you have a drink, and there are people talking about the health thing, and other people talk about marketing, then there are people talking about podcasting. Where are you going? Where are you going? Where are you an expert? Where you can bring something of value to the table of discussion. And when you talk there, you should actually talk in a way so people listen in, they go by and listen in, they hear that Josef talking about podcast guesting, and it's so interesting that they actually come and stay there with you and listen to you. That's how you should talk on a podcast, so spontaneous. Cocktail party. It's a good metaphor. But but the whole thing is, when you start out with podcast guesting, your question was, should they go on a small podcast? Well, sometimes they can, if it depends on their expertise, on their uniqueness. When you have a uniqueness and you are not so great, you don't have, let's say, when you have a really unique thing, you can solve people's problems in a very unique way and a very high success rate. You don't need to be so accomplished. You might just have a website with an email. Doesn't matter, because you're such people looking for the solution. If you go on the right podcast, that's fine. You can go right away and create podcasts. But ultimately, when you're not, and most people, they start out while they're still learning. So we're learning from experience. That's so important. We are jumping on a podcast tour. Let's say we get 3 or 4 interviews, and we have no clue yet how this is going to be really work out at the end. But while we are this 2 months on those podcasts being interviewed, and somebody has to help us, usually in the beginning, right? I do it, for business, but unless you want to do it yourself, you can educate yourself and read about it. If you don't make money on your clients yet, then you have the time, right? Otherwise, you lose the money because you better work on your clients and you hand it over to somebody, some booking agency. But what I want to really express here is that you want to actually do it and learn it. Because why do you want to do it? Because you already have an expertise, because you already have a compelling story, right? Because you already know this is the way to go to establish your business as a solopreneur. Now, you can't know everything theoretically. You can read all the books in the world. It will just overwhelm you. I would suggest go on a podcast. Go on 4, right? And choose not the biggest ones, of course. Choose the ones where you say, I listened into the episode, the host is comfortable, and I think I can have a conversation. But then, you will learn while you do it. That the email pitch, where you express the topics you can talk about, you buy on all this, and you make yourself like a strawberry in front of the mouth of the host. It's email, because you can't send this short notice on LinkedIn. You can remind them on LinkedIn that you sent them an email to this email address and all this. That's multi-channel follow-up, that's fine. But don't expect anything works but email. And every podcast host knows it, because they want to read more about that person when he pitches, not just, hey, I would like to be on your podcast. I'm a famous person from Latin America or whatever. No, they want to know that you listen to an episode. They want to know why you think you're good at that podcast, why you would be valuable to the audience, what are your topics, your social media, all this you put in the email, right? But if you have never been on a podcast, well, that's the first time you have to be on a few podcasts so you can put it in your pitch. I was on those podcasts, right? So then you can move up to higher level podcasts. And that was your question, basically. Yes, I agree 100%. You should start out with like newer podcasts, but check the hosts. You don't want to have a host. Let's say if you are talking about spirituality, which is my business leadership, business, marketing, spirituality. These are health. These are the kind of, I also do a little bit of real estate, but these are kind of my areas. Not every area, but these are the kind of areas. So when you like spirituality, you can get people as hosts. Let's say you've written a book on the 7, like some levels of consciousness, whatever. And it's very interesting. And now you want to talk on those top level podcasts there. But you will meet hosts maybe who are very spiritually, very arrogant and very like big ego. I see it often. So they just use that to talk over you and to put you down and things like this. You have to really look a little bit in the podcast. Not every host is always a great guy or a great person, right? So look at it, because particularly in spirituality, you want to humble people, right? Somebody you really like, you want to present your book, you don't want somebody say, oh, that was a déjà vu, I already heard that before, things like this. I get my clients saying this. It happens very seldom. It happens like, I would say, out of 100%, maybe 5%, that the podcast is just, especially in spirituality, because there are mediums, there are people who still, they like the UFOs, and everybody's fine, right? I don't judge anybody, but you need to be on a podcast where it's really resonating with what you want to talk about. Otherwise, you get not a great interview. But otherwise, and then it's the first priority is not to be on the top level podcast. The first priority is that you get a few ones where you resonate well with the podcast host. That's what I wanted to say.
Yeah, I totally agree. And just a quick little thing that most people wouldn't know, because you mentioned the cocktail parties, and whether it's a networking event or something like that, I'm going to give you a little tip. Maybe but I think it's a benefit for everybody. Most people, when they're at these things, they're holding the drink with their right hand. I recommend holding it with your left hand, because you don't want to be shaking somebody's hand with a cold hand.
That's right. Nice. Good idea. Don't forget to move around, move everywhere.
Exactly.
All the time. You will meet so many people.
So, like, there's one thing I want to touch. I suppose you mentioned the ego, the personality and everything. So I'm not going to name the person, but I've been on a guy's show, and he was previously on mine, so I kind of connected with him. But I just kind of knew when I was on his show, I said he's up to something just the way he's doing it. He cancelled so many times, which I don't like. I value my time, and I know that we've had a lot of calls. We're very respectful of each other's times and everything. It's like I give you a 10 out of 10 for that. Like, you're brilliant for that. But this guy wasn't. Changed it 3 or 4 times, and I just kind of like, we had the interview, and then he done a pitch later with like trying to get me to buy not his service, his partner service, and I just thought, and then it was like ending it as fast as possible. And I had organised that one of my clients go on a show. He stopped it 5 minutes in and said, "You're pitching," to my client, and ended it and just disappeared. And like, my client was kind of traumatized. I said, "Don't worry, this guy," and I even had tipped him off before, and I think this guy might try to pitch you. But it just shows, like, some people go on a podcast thinking this is going to be a fantastic experience. And you must remember, some people, they're flaky. They'll just cancel the last minute. Some people just don't turn up and you never get to them again. But there's other people, they're fantastic. They're very professional. But I mean, you've obviously seen that as well with your journey.
And we would need 3 episodes to talk about it. Just recently, I had a client, but I had a client because he was just terrible in a way, but he was very famous. He was coaching Olympic teams in cycling. So I live in Mallorca. He said, "Oh, we have to meet one day," and I love Mallorca. I was cycling there all the time, and he's coaching Olympic teams, and he's a business consultant. So he's from California. So I pitched him very well. He got like on many podcasts, but he was just incredible. I mean, incredibly bad for social and for anything where you say human dignity, please, Like, he would say, a very good podcast host would say, they would make an appointment, they would make and he would say, he would just change it. And his secretary trained her very well because she was rude like him. And they would say, no, we can't make it. No, sorry, no apologies, we can make it. Can you schedule it again? So I was thinking, my gosh, like you could at least say apology, I didn't say anything because I don't put myself into this kind of situations usually, unless it gets really, really bad. But then I could just be one side and the other one. That guy was completely ignored by me because the next thing was that he missed it and that new one, and he missed it, and then no apologies from the secretary and from him. And then they wanted to put a new appointment on, and that was over for me. I will never accept that person back to because it's not good for my network either. So she says, and now, because they had to reschedule, right, and to make a new appointment, and now I had to interrupt him from lunch. So it's your fault to the podcast host. I said, no, okay, that's it, no more. No. So people are like this. There are people out there you wouldn't believe in, I mean, really. Or, I would say, like the final touch here would be, when you are, let's say, I had another client and she had no internet that day and she was booked on a top-level podcast, like top level podcast. And she, like a few hours before, she would say she will not go there she cannot do the interview because her internet is out in London. Happened in London. I don't know how this happens. So I saw this conversation. I said, why don't you go in front of the host? I said, why don't you go to a 5-star hotel with your laptop and do it anyway? No, she was then mad at me. You see, I mean, personal, it's really like important that we know that this 1 or 5% of people, they exist in the podcast world also, not just when you watch a movie and you say, where's the shark? 5 minutes, nothing happens. No, where's the shark? But you are in a little village like I am, Mallorca. There will be beautiful people all over. And then there's one spoiled one and two maybe, and they want to ruin the whole atmosphere. But then, again, that is our world. It's a world of duality. We talked about it in meditation. You have to just see it the way it is and not like emotionally get yourself into it. But they're everywhere. They're also in the podcasting world. And when you experience them, don't take it personal. Just say, okay, I got this now. Now it's over. Now I get nice ones again. Just distance yourself. Don't write any email. Forget it. Just ignore it. That's how my thing is. My strategy. No friction. I like the Taoist principle, right? Wu Wei, no friction. It's all good.
So there's another one now. People that are charging for you to go on their show. And I think we've touched, I won't mention the guy because we left the name of the podcast up, but there's one guy on the platform will reach out to you claiming he's got something like 6 million plus. And when you actually investigate it, he's got tiny. So his YouTube was something he was promoting before. And I see a lot of people like that. I've had pitches and people say we've got 15,000 downloads. Obviously, because I've got 6 shows and I'm like in the top 0.5% with 4 of them. I know exactly how to do this and how to check it. And when I start asking the right questions, they just disappear. So there's 2 things. There's one, people charging, and the other thing is they're lying about the numbers. I mean, I get it. Some people have spent a lot of money building up their podcast and they go, all right, no, we know this is worth X, and they're charging. But there's so many layers out there, which is a shame.
It is. I mean, there are so many podcasts out there. When somebody wants, from my client says, no, he can be on the podcast now and I do some promotion, or in a year because I have a huge waiting list, and now they will cost $500. I say to my client, well, if you want to do it, fine, but I wouldn't suggest to do it because there are so many podcasts out there, I can put you on another one. And so it's sometimes people, when they ask $200, I can waive my fee and they go on that podcast, they have that experience, I don't care. But usually, you can go to for $3,500 on the podcast, like the one, what is it?
John Duma,
exactly.
CEO on Fire.
Yeah, one interview. So the thing is, the podcast guesting, the statistics, the podcast hosting goes up in numbers. The market goes up every year, almost 30% accumulated growth until 2030. That means it will be 130 billion, the market. The podcast is like other media. They will make money with advertising, right? The podcast guests are their bread and butter. Without the great interviews, without the expertise of those, they won't have content. They won't get listenership. They won't get the listenership. Yeah, so it's a, you know, there's a. I'm not saying strictly that a podcast host cannot ask money for an expert. It all depends. If it's like, you know, I mean, there are always exceptions, but that is usually the structure. But, you know, that is so important also to know that most of the podcasting world is a fantastic, beautiful world because of this technology that we can really, like, I can talk with somebody in America. I can talk with somebody in all over the world, in England, next day in Australia, the next day. English podcasts, they are heard in Germany. You know it because your podcasts, they are in the top chart, like 0.5% global rank. So you know it when you look at the iTunes chart, you're always in the 100 and stuff like this. So they are, or you're number one in Germany. Things like this can happen because the people, if it's a good podcast, they don't care. They listen in English. So English is the business language, is the shortest expressions, you know, and most people speak it. So this is the lovely thing, you know. You think about how hierarchical not too long ago was our media world. So you had to have huge amounts of money to print the newspaper. Television station was even worse, right? But now you don't. Now actually the real good people, both in interviewing and in being interviewed, they can rise up. And they do. And you get like topics about subjects which usually you would never find like an interview. You would just basically find, maybe if you're lucky, on Google some kind of document. But now you actually see like a whole podcast only centered around this topic. It's beautiful, I think, for everybody in the world.
And what's your thoughts on, like, because one thing I never do with my guests, I'm never out to get them. Yet a load of people are kind of paranoid and they're kind of checking what are you going to ask me and stuff like that. I'm always out there to have a fantastic conversation, to get as much information and value so that the listeners are benefiting for the conversation. But there is some, I kind of class it as like a clickbait kind of podcaster, where they're out to catch the person, make them look bad, try to throw them, research something and basically bring up dirt from them. Like, I keep away from stuff like that because I do the research as well before I actually kind of go on to a show. But
yeah,
like, you've obviously probably seen some of that as well.
Yes, I mean, you know, again, we are like, I have this small village where I live. There are 700 people in my village in New York, in the mountains. And I live now 3 years here, and there are all kinds of people there from Sweden, from Germany, from England, I'm from Austria, the only one here. However, that, 1 second, I have this things coming up. I have to really close it down, otherwise I can't see anyone. So, you know, there are people, they are just bored. They lie in their beautiful house in the bed and have nothing else to do than think about other people. And they love gossips, you know. And for most people, it's like nonsense. Why would I be interested in that stuff, right? But they come and they right away, they live from this negative energy. And see, that is the same thing with the podcast hosts. And, you know, they also like sometimes base their whole show on this negative stuff. If you look in spirituality, and I like a lot, Buddhism, for instance, you start with the Eightfold Path. And one of the Eightfold Paths, one of those 8, you know, is no gossip, good speech. It comes from good thinking. It comes from good understanding, the right understanding. Then it comes the right livelihood and all this. But people who don't have that, who don't have the right understanding about the world and life and themselves, they don't know themselves, they fall quickly into this negative stuff, right? I think we can easily protect ourselves and stay away from it because there are just so many positive people. I would say it's overwhelmingly positive. You know, it's overwhelmingly positive. I in all these years, 7 years now, podcast guesting, I have not sent a single bad email and received a few times, and I just ignored it. Because I don't send it, because then you think, it's coming back, right? However, I must say that, and that goes with our good friend Daniel Bakar, that with the self-care list, I must say, I like to be assertive, stand up for myself and say no, and show my boundaries. When somebody's just, I tell them, I tell them very shortly. I make sure it's polite, but it's clear that these are my boundaries, and they just overstepped it, and I get right away a nice email back, usually. So,
and I think that's something that I kind of learned from Daniel, actually. It was like, because I could see that he wouldn't tolerate people cancelling last minute and stuff like that. And I just kind of go, when someone cancels, like, oh, grand, let's reschedule. And then I was like, no, I start, like, same thing. I'd say it nice and polite, but I would write, and even somebody, you do all the research and everything, the interview is about to be ready. I got one recently, 20 minutes beforehand, they said, yeah, I've actually been reviewing it, and I don't think we're a match. After they requesting to come on my show, I had obviously done all my preparation. And, that's just the things that...
it just reflects the whole society. I mean, it's like, it's not different. Like I always reply, I always relate it to the little village I am in, or I could go to Austria as well. It's always the same. And, William Shakespeare said clearly, the whole world is a stage, and we are mere actors. So in other words, everybody with their egos, we're just playing our part. And sometimes in a real game, in a real theater, people go in the green room and then they take off their mask and then they can laugh, but they have been real enemies in the theater, But that's how I think we have to see it. It's like, that's the world. We want it that way. I think we chose it that way. We want to have action. And they appear, this kind of things, these dualities, they come everywhere. And it's just, if the last thing I would like to say about this is really like the Dalai Lama said, if somebody is not kind to you and you become unkind to them, then you're on the same level. However, if you stay kind and you say, well, I'm happy that I'm not like this, then you will go on a walk where you will forget it in 10 minutes.
Okay. Do you speak Spanish as well?
Yes.
So have you got... Yeah, no, because sometimes people stay in the country. I mean, I know people that they're in Poland for 15 years or 20 years and they don't know any Polish. But like, why I'm asking is, I'm just curious, do you deal with German clients and Spanish clients and get them on shows as well?
No, I just go American.
Oh, okay.
Canadian, Australian, American, everything's in English. A Japanese could do it with me, or a South American could do it, but it's all English. I don't go into different languages because I have enough business just like that, and it makes it simple for me. Now I speak Spanish because I was 24 years in Latin America altogether. Yeah, and I was on those television shows, those 50, that was all in Spanish, by the way.
Oh, brilliant.
Yeah.
So I know that you're kind of ahead of the curve. I mean, I'm using AI for kind of titles, even graphics, text and stuff like that, and I'm kind of working on businesses as well connected with AI, and you're kind of ahead of the curve with that. So where do you kind of see AI that's beneficial? We mentioned the shorts, that you said that generates it, but what else can AI be doing for both the podcaster or people guesting?
You mentioned it to me actually in a different conversation. It wasn't a podcast interview where you talked, that you can actually, I know it because I'm very much interested in the new development of AI, and where you can, like this Lab 11 Labs or Hey Gene, these are the websites, the brands are working on this, where you could actually, and there are more, where you can actually have this podcast episodes in English, and then it can be in Spanish, the same one. It's not a translation, actually. The AI makes it really in the new language, right? And you can actually talk the whole episode because, I would say ethically, would just say in collaboration with AI. Because, when you do it in Japanese, if there's a market for you, in other countries, it could be in Africa, wherever, right? Or in Egypt, because you can speak any language with AI. You just have your video uploaded or your audio, and then it creates that. It's just amazing, but it doesn't translate. Josef Schinwald is talking in Chinese, Mandarin, or I'm talking in that whatever it is, whatever language it is. Not all of them, probably, but many. I would say several hundred. And if that is for the podcast beneficial, and as long as long as you mention in collaboration with AI, it shouldn't be a problem, right?
And like just on that, I think I showed you the video that because I'm constantly getting people approach me for beta testing and all that, and one of them had done my podcast into Spanish, an interview, and then something that I was doing a solo thing, and I knew by looking at it, so you'd see me with my voice speaking in Spanish, and I was like, wow, this is great. But the mouth sync was out, so I just sent the audio to a Spanish friend of mine saying, hey, I've been practicing my Spanish, I'm thinking of releasing it. And they didn't know that it was AI. One guy did, because he's kind of into computers and stuff like that. So that just shows the level that it's at, that even a Spanish-speaking person didn't know that it wasn't me. They just assumed it was me.
Yes. But, it's like very valuable at the same time. I remember when I was teaching in 3 universities, that was like, it was only 4 days, so it's like around 2000. I just read 10 business books a month for many, many years. And so whatever I read just came fresh out of Harvard Business School, whatever, like the Balanced Scorecard or Mercer Consulting, like the profit patterns and the profit models. And they were not in Spanish. They didn't exist. I mean, it would another 5-10 years until these books are translated and becoming popular in Latin America. So the same thing, when you have a podcast and you can, and because of AI, it can now appear in these countries, that's a huge benefit for those countries. The business language and the business world is really originating more or less from the English-speaking world. That's just the way it is. Spirituality, the same thing. Everybody goes into the, in Latin America, yoga, spirituality, you get a few books translated, but it's not that much. And so when you think about the podcasting, the real great podcast in English, for those who don't speak English, it's not possible to listen to. But now, if it's really translated, then people could actually, So it's a beneficial thing.
With, like, this is kind of like the $1 million question as well, the social media, because, I mean, we're connected on a few things, and yeah, some things work, some things I think it's a time suck because there's so many of them out there. But a lot of the guests, like I tell my clients what to do, giving reviews and stuff like that, how to actually put their title, because I tell them, put your name and your domain name, because then people will actually see that. But I also, to the share, comment on the shorts and everything. But there's so many people, they're doing the podcast tour, and they don't even respond when you send them the links and stuff like that, or they don't share it, or they don't comment and stuff like that. And they're actually hurting themselves because they think that their list of followers know exactly what they're doing. But it could be based on a conversation that they've had with a person, that the person decides to start liking them and requiring them, hey, I think I actually want them as a client.
Yeah, absolutely. And, above all, I had a client who said to me, I should follow up on a podcast interview. She doesn't know when it's published. I said, you know what? I would love to do it, but I wonder one thing. I wonder why you don't have used that interview in networking. Because when you are being interviewed, then you know that person, right? You talk with that person with that host. So why can't you just send a quick email with an easy question? I would like to know when it's published. I'm so excited about it. It was a fascinating episode. That's all. You see what I mean? But they don't do that. So they don't do the networking. I love the networking with podcast hosts. When I'm interviewed, then I have a new friend often, and I have somebody I can relate to on LinkedIn. I can relate to that person and send them my clients also. But the podcasting itself is a huge marketing event. It's that cocktail bar. Sometimes those podcast hosts, they read your book. I mean, it's an influencer. You've written a book, that podcast host reads it, you send it to him for free, of course. And then you're getting interviewed by it. You're getting so many goodies, So I don't know, people just, when they're on a podcast, do I have it myself? I will, by the beach, I get that lady. She's enlightened, okay? I don't doubt it. But it doesn't mean much, And, they are on the call. They talk about themselves. They're off the call. You send them a message. You never get an answer. I don't want to interview such people. I mean, it's very important to stay natural. That's the same with AI. Any technology is just a tool. There's the humanness, human-heartedness, as the Confucius mentioned it, right? We talked about it a little bit on the meditation podcast, but that's what is human-heartedness. It's not human brain. People confuse it. If the brain is not connected with the heart, it's not human, right? And if we just use the technology because why? It's just like, I can know, whatever. No, that's wrong. That's totally wrong. It's, I think, right now more important than ever to have the human touch in everything you do. By the way, I just want to mention one thing, that I have a gift for everybody listening. It's a very nice one, and where they can download it. At the end, we can talk about it, but it's really about getting on those high-end podcasts and all the things we talked about. So make sure it's a real good podcast. Make sure the host is a good, poignant questioner, and that you have a great experience. And you can do it yourself when you read this book, and you can actually go on a tour yourself if you don't have clients yet, because otherwise it's better to use an agency, because you can make more money in the time with clients, with your own expertise, right? But because it takes a while to get that expertise. But then there's a huge mountain of knowledge about like tips and all this for the people who are now finally getting this overcome that fear of public speaking. There's still lots of great tips and advice for those with podcast guesting. Is an incredible marketing channel, and it is, if you're a solopreneur and you just have maybe a few assistants, or our company can be 30 employees who are just based on you, it's like the best you can do, really. But you have to have a little bit of a patience. It's not like you're going on one podcast and I didn't have new sales. You have to give it some time. It takes time to get adjusted. And then after, let's say, 3, 4, 5 interviews, and then in a year when you have 15 interviews, you're going to have great results. But again, you need some coaching for that, because when you just go on podcast tours and you don't have like a lead magnet, or you don't have a dedicated welcome page, which I'm implementing more and more now for my clients also, like where you say, like, let's say I was on your podcast, and then I specifically on one page only, I mention that page and I say, or that podcast, and let's say it's about the Podfather podcast, I say, welcome Podfather listeners. You see, very ridiculous. And then I have a very special thing for them. It could be an assessment. It could be a video just for them, right? It could be the free discovery code, whatever it is, but they should feel special. And now I know also with the statistics, with the, how many people came from that podcast. As many times you can go a second time on a podcast. Even if you have an agent, the second time is free, of course, because you already, if you know how to network, you already have the network. In a year, you say, oh, I wrote another book. It was such a wonderful interview with you. Can we hop on another interview? They will do it, So that is also very important. That I know people, they have a very special offer. Let's say they say, like, your name is Roy, of course. They say, just mention the code Roy and you get 50% off. That makes the listeners feel special. If you do this continuously, like the marketing, get them in your funnel really well, and they convert even to small things, a little ebook for $7 first, but then they buy the whole course, or they get coaching from you. But do something which you can actually measure, then you will have so much more results. People are just like this, because you're listening to this podcast in the car, or the woman while she's doing something in the household. Sorry, that was like not well said. The woman who is sitting, the executive who's sitting in Manhattan in the top penthouse, So I would say it's very important to know this, that we need the marketing, we need the basic understanding about marketing. And even when you talk, there are so many elements you must learn and should learn by doing, to have a deep expertise, to have a framework, right? Are you entertaining? Because this is the future of podcasting also. It's the edutainment. People want to be educated and entertained, and on and on and on. So it's good to do a little bit of a coaching if you can. with somebody, like you or like me. I mean, it's like while I sell my podcast, my 3-4 podcast interviews, I also offer a little bit of a coaching, which is nice because you need somebody to go over your interviews and give you some feedback. Everybody has blind spots. It could be me, it could be anybody, with a lot of experience, or it could be somebody who's just starting out.
You mentioned the books there. That's something I put into my form because I've got a form that I get the guest fellows. I said if they're promoting a book, I actually want the book to be sent to me. I even have my address in the thing to stop all the correspondence back and forth. And I basically say I don't like reading PDFs because we're on the computer too much. I like to be out in my garden reading or just, downstairs when if the weather isn't great. And the amount of times that somebody doesn't want to send it, they go, "No, I just send it to you," because they don't want to spend, say, maybe if they're from the States, $20 on postage and stuff like that. And it's kind of squeezing the pennies and not seeing the bigger picture. And then I have other people, like they might have a course worth £1,000 and they'll go, "Look, I want to give like you mentioned the code, I want to give a 50% discount, but I also want to give you the full course for nothing if you're interested." And
yeah, that's a big thing, that people first should really understand when they are in front of a podcast host or when they are invited, that person has accumulated 200 episodes. Can they do it every week and then format it and interview every week? It's so much discipline. And now you're invited to be and talk to his audience or her audience. Isn't that a gift worth something, At least a thank you and let's stay in contact, let's stay in touch and whatever. Your audience, they deserve this discount from me. But, you can't, some people, they're just not so light, up there. They might be experts, but all lights are not on. And then they don't understand even the basic human interaction. They're also human interaction, like networking. It's like terrible sometimes. But whatever, people are like this. You can't change it. Maybe there is some people say there's a change in consciousness. The whole world is ascending zone and whatever, consciousness. Maybe, I don't know. I hope I'm there. I hope they don't let me back. But I'm not. I'm more like, the Oriental philosophy. Just I like the psychology of the Buddha. I'm not much into actually this kind of things. But I have clients who are, and I interview them also, and I'm very fascinated also, But I see it, with so many clients, so many experts, that how different they can be, and you think each time they could be completely right, they could be completely right, they could be completely right. That's our world, right? This is our world, but thanks God that we have podcasting. I love this thing. I love this. I love it more than social media. Much more than social media. But social media is also getting more and more positive now for me, because these interviews, you can grab the URL once it's published on YouTube. You don't have to ask the podcast host and we just talk. That's already normal. Everybody can grab that link. And you just, with AI, slice it up to 25 clips. And for your social media, Twitter, Instagram, LinkedIn. LinkedIn is very important for me. Facebook, I'm just testing things out on Facebook. But these video clips from you, they're constantly out. People in the street here, what are you doing right now? You became so professional now, whatever. But they notice it, and I don't even think they listen to it or they see it. But so few people actually, real podcast subscribers, hardcore podcast subscribers. A lot of people, they might just listen to 30 seconds on LinkedIn. And a lot of people will just see it all the time that you have different podcasts. They just see it. They just see the video. They don't even listen to it. And they still assume that you're the podcast, that you are the expert, the go-to expert, and the authority. And that is so fascinating. It's just a real nice marketing strategy. There's a myth, there's a reality. The reality is that you are not invited by the podcast because you are so famous, that you actually pitched yourself or you had an agency pitching yourself. That's the reality. The myth is that you are already so famous that you're constantly invited by the podcast host. And why would you tell anybody? They don't know it. It's a myth, But it helps you in your marketing. And it goes on and on, on after.
No, you're great. Listen, Joseph, I thoroughly enjoy it. But what I want to say is, we know each other for a few years. As I mentioned at the start, we've been on each other's shows. But, I've had a lot of guests from you. And what I can say is you have never, ever given me a guest that I didn't feel I had a fantastic interview, because you get top quality clients that you work with. And the other thing is, I mean, some people, they just send me, I get hundreds of pitches, but the way that you do it is so professional. Like, you actually really do it in a way that makes me go through it, look at it, and go straight away. And you give kind of previous interviews and everything. You're so professional. And even because I've got like 15,000 emails, it's never personal, but there's times you know how to follow up nice as well. And it's like, then I see it, and it's like, you just have a brilliant way of doing it. So, I mean, we're actually collaborating as well with one of my clients, because I've got him on hundreds of shows, but everybody's got their own kind of database of people, good relationships and everything. And like, one thing I love about us is we've always shared information. And it's actually something that I've noticed over the years with podcasting. I was always telling other podcasters what to do and everything. Some would give you some information, but most were just taking. And I can honestly say that you have given me a lot of information, links on the AI and stuff like that. We've always been collaborating, sharing, which is why I can highly recommend you. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. That's very, very kind words. And you know, I like to give something to your audience, because we did talk a lot about like, very interesting, maybe for professional people in that arena, they can identify with it. But let's say we have people here also, of course, they have been thinking about podcast guesting or public speaking, that they are already interested, so they know about the fears, and the only way to overcome is just do it. But then I have this ebook which gives them more advice, and particularly, it's only 30 pages, that ebook, but it's very nicely done with pictures and really well formatted, so you will enjoy reading it. And it gives you, except my blueprint, like what you mentioned now, with the pitch, the email template, the positioning of yourself. But most important, it gives you the secret sauce, how I get this high-end podcast. In other words, there is a methodology I use, which is a shortcut where you could do it yourself. 3 hours a month of work, you get one top-level podcast, if you have an expertise, of course, and you will have some 3,000, 5,000 listeners. So it's like, that is a little bit with AI, because what you do is you basically, just to say quickly so people can take away something from here, like those who are interested in podcast guesting, that you are basically really work very hard on your own expertise, your own bio, your own topics, and your own positioning. Then you ask AI, ChatGPT, everybody knows ChatGPT, who doesn't? Maybe there is a link in the show notes. You ask, what are other 20 or 30 experts like me? That's a very important question. Because now you're getting these other experts like you, even better ones. And now you go into Listen Notes or elsewhere, where the search engine for podcasts is called Listen Notes. And you basically put these names in with parentheses, and you look on which podcasts they have been on. Simple. They are now interview-based podcasts, and you can choose the ones. You can choose those who are not yet so high level, because you just start, or when you're already famous, you don't do this yourself. You ask somebody else. But I just say, it's a good way. It's in the book. It's also the myth of podcast casting is in there, and how to maintain it and follow up, and a lot of other great advice, so you can actually do your own podcast tour if you want to put in the work. Unless you want to have somebody else do the heavy lifting, you can always ask somebody who does that professionally. So I just wanted to say that, because I wanted people to get something here. From me, that book is worth something if you're interested in podcast guesting and getting your own bookings done during the year, maybe 10. It's a good start.
Yeah. So, and I mean, I love the way you actually share that, because most people, they hold it towards them. But I think by doing that, I think people kind of realize your professionalism, and then they decide, I'd like this guy to be working for me because he knows what he's doing. And I mean, obviously, we both have, like, you give out so much, but there's millions of different things, all the different pieces, and you can never put all that information down on a thing. But like, they actually get that you're sharing, plus 100 other things that you're able to bring to the table.
Yes. Well, that is what before I mentioned the URL where you can download that book for free. I wanted to just also mention that my clients, and we know both they're really extraordinary individuals. They always give me also the best feedback about you. And they're very, very happy that I put them on your podcast, like the meditation podcast, the speaker podcast, and others. And they're very, very happy. And they said it was a great interview, a great host. And I just wanted to let you know this also, because you just said so many things now, and they really touched me. And thank you very much for your kind words. Now, the URL is my website is guestexpertsonair.com. Now, you go to guestexpertsonair.com/podcast promo. Now, this is said with my Austrian accent, like Arnold. Oh, here's a much better one.
Podcast promo is for those that didn't understand.
Promo. Can you repeat it, the URL and the podcast promo, so that people have a chance to actually go there?
Guest. I don't have it written down here, but his promo is on the thing anyway. And of course, I'm gonna
guest, guest experts,
on air,
on air .com/podcast promo, one word, podcast promo. Anyway, it will be in the show notes, I'm sure.
Absolutely, it'll be both in the video and the audio. But Josef, as always, thoroughly enjoyed our conversation. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
No problem. So be sure to give us a thumbs up, 5-star rating, share it with your friends, and comment. Let us know what you thought about what we were discussing today. And you'll find everything on speakingpodcast.com. Until next week, take care.